we've got Regenerative Ag 101. Hopefully you're all here for that today. Before we get started, we want to thank our sponsor, Live Organic, with the audio and visual. So thank you for sponsoring and being a part of this session today. My name is Shelby Layne. I'm Director of ESG, Environmental, Social, and Governance at Bolthouse Farms. We are excited to talk to you today, along with three wonderful panelists, about regenerative agriculture. With us, if you have not already, first of all, silenced your cell phones, please take a minute to go ahead and do so. And of course, we want to thank our ED sponsor, Organic Produce Network. So first of all, let's go ahead and kick it off with our three panelists who we are pleased to have here with us today. We have Eric Morgan, give us a wave, the Vice President of Environmental Science and Resources of Braga Fresh. We have T. Bruce Taylor, the Vice President of Organic and Earthbound Farm Brand for Taylor Farms. Bruce is the fourth generation in his family to work in the produce industry and has spent his career in produce at Taylor Farms and Wonderful Company. And we have Vernon Peterson, the owner of Abundant Harvest Organics. Vernon has been farming for 40 years and 10 years ago saw the opportunity with organics. His packing facility is a year-round operation, packing organic stone fruit, persimmons, and citrus. So let's give a round of applause welcoming our panelists. Alrighty, let's go ahead and jump right in today. Regenerative Ag 101, is regenerative the new organic? Nice and provocative title to get the day kicked off here for us. So we've just gone through the folks we've got in the room. I want to take a minute to start with the backdrop. I don't know about you, but it feels like everywhere I turn these days, I'm hearing regenerative ag referred to, referenced, regen, all of these shorthand names. And it felt important just to take a step back and say, let's spend 5 minutes making sure we're all on the same page with what exactly it is this means, what it is we're talking about, and then from there we will jump in with our panelists today to sort through the challenging topics in front of us and in front of the industry. So what factors are contributing to this moment? How did we get here today? Some of these factors are relevant in terms of what we know about our food system, with more than a third of all man-made greenhouse gas emissions being generated by food systems, in the broadest sense of that term. So there is some level of responsibility we all have by being in this industry to understand that. Not to get too bleak here, but when you look at the use of topsoil that we have, you can see that there's roughly 60 years remaining based on the current conditions of soil worldwide. And I think we all in this room know the keen importance of topsoil, but clearly the impact on yields is absolutely critical. So no small topic to address. And then a new term that I know has been floating around is the concept of pollinators, and just recognizing the absolute critical role that pollinators play in all of our produce and the ability for us to take responsibility for how we farm and show up. So just some light stats to get us started. But what factors contributed to how we got to today? These are things, we hear these numbers, these stats, it can feel overwhelming. How do we actually get involved? How did this come into the industry? Because these stats have been there, right? How is it actually funneling down? Many of you may have heard of the Rodale Institute. They are a nonprofit in the industry who have focused on regenerative agriculture for decades. They came out with two really impactful reports, one in 2014 and 2020 that got quite a bit of press, that started showing the science behind our ability to sequester carbon in the soil. And as a result of that, a lot of the other ecosystem impacts of our soil as a result of farming practices. One of the quotes that really hit me over the head was, quote, "Data from farming and grazing studies show the power of exemplary regenerative systems that, if achieved globally, would draw down more than 100% of current annual CO2 emissions." That feels dramatic. It is in the studies. And the thing that struck me with that is this concept that it is possible. right? It's always hard when you turn on the news and you see these, you say, what do I do? How do I even think about the future of being involved in the sustainability of farming? There are things we can do. This is not hopeless. But of course you have to say, well, we're all business people. What does this actually mean? A recent study from the Conservation Finance Network found that farms with regenerative practices were nearly 80% more profitable than those with only conventional practices. That also feels like a pretty dramatic statement. And of course, you have to think about short-term and immediate returns versus long-term. But the point is, and we talk about this a lot internally at Bolthouse Farms, this is not a charitable endeavor. The idea is not to do this on the side. The idea is how do we take these agricultural practices and actually incorporate them in a profitable way into our operations. And we're going to hear from our panelists today how they're doing that and how they're thinking about that. And the last item I'd like to talk about here today is the hype that you're feeling is very real. This is a quick snapshot of searches of the term regenerative agriculture, and you can see over the last 5 to 7 years a dramatic spike. Just to show the conversation is here, we are in the right room, and we are thinking about what we do. So we've heard a lot about it. Like we said, there's buzzwords, there's shorthands. But before we dive, as the last section here, before we dive into the panelists, I think it's really critical to talk about how do we define regenerative agriculture. There is not one standard definition, so this took combing through many pages and trying to say what would be the most concise and clear way of doing it. So let's take a stab. So in short, regenerative agriculture is a system of farming principles and practices. So we're going to keep going, but think of this is a system. This is not just one practice here or one practice there. It's an ecosystem level way of farming that seeks to rehabilitate and enhance the entire ecosystem of the farm by placing a heavy premium on soil health with attention also paid to water management, fertilizer use, and more. Internally at Bolthouse Farms, we refer to it as soil-first farming. Regenerative is one way in which you can do that, but the idea is that if you are making decisions based on the biology and the chemistry of the soil, many of these other systems, water management, fertilizer use, et cetera, are actually being positively impacted by focusing on soil health. It comes out of that. It is a method of farming that improves the resources it uses, hence regenerates, rather than destroying or depleting them, according to the Rodale Institute. There's a great deal of emphasis being placed on looking holistically at the agro-ecosystem. Again, this is holistic, this is not easy, this is not narrow, but when you take that ecosystem approach and you bring that in line, the results are tremendous. And last but not least, regenerative refers to a type of farming that goes above and beyond today's organic standards, which is a part of our conversation here today, to actively regenerate the natural resources used while supporting healthy, thriving communities. I want to pause on this last piece. Rodale Institute is partnered with a group called the Regenerative Organic Alliance, and they have a certification called ROC, Regenerative Organic Certification. And one of the foci that they have of their certification is this thriving communities piece of it. When we talk about a holistic system, you cannot leave behind the people who are working the land, who are building this system. And so ecosystem means 360, and I think that it's tremendous that a certification, one of which is out there, can focus on community in that way. So that's a lot to take in. What are we doing about it? How are we trying this out? How are we thinking about this future? Let's dive in with our panelists and jump right into questions because there's a lot to digest. All right. So one of the things I would love to pose to our panelists today is how did regenerative agriculture first come up as a practice that you even considered, right? Folks are in the room here, but presumably they're here because they heard about it. What was that conversation like internally when it first came up? Want to kick us off?
I can. Well, at Taylor Farms, we've always been proud of being responsible stewards of the resources that we use. We're proud of the fact that we're a privately held company and we're able to make investments for the long haul. And this is one of those investments. For us, it's just the right thing to do. If we can use farming practices to actively sequester carbon and lighten our environmental footprint, it's the right thing to do. We then looked at it from our customer partner perspective. Our customer partners have lofty sustainability goals that they're trying to reach pertaining to pollinator habitat, lightening carbon sequestration, lightening CO2 emissions, and lowering carbon footprint. So if we can help our customers solve their goals, that's incredibly powerful for us. And then third, from a consumer perspective, we think consumers are ready for beyond organic. I saw a Nielsen study the other day about Gen Z shoppers. And 75% of Gen Z shoppers factor sustainability into the brands and the products they purchase. So sustainability is becoming increasingly important as a purchasing criteria for consumers, and we think regenerative is a tool to serve that need.
Wonderful. And Eric, who has come with his pollinator socks on to this event, very appropriate, would love to get a sense of how this conversation first came up in your world.
Well, I've been thinking about this for a long time because I do think that one of the problems that we have with our practices is the environmental space. So I started looking at tillage about 10 years ago, and I talked to one of my mentors, and he said, you can't really change what we do for tillage in this valley. We started having conversations in-house a couple years ago, probably 3 years ago, bouncing it around, and then at one point I said, hey, let's just do some trials. And so I didn't really check with anybody else. I just called our production manager, Kyle, and said, hey, let's do some regenerative agriculture trials. And so he got a little mad after a couple beers on the Saturday afternoon at 3:30, called our CEO, Rod, and Rod, knowing me for a very long time, said, let's give Eric a little bit of leash and see what we can do. And we've been kind of chasing after it a little bit, but really our focus is on tillage, because I do think that so much of what we're experiencing with CO2 emissions, nitrous oxide emissions, fertilizer in surface water, groundwater on the conventional side, neonics and pyrethroids in surface water, everything that we're seeing, water availability, there's a tillage component to it. And so we're trying to figure it out. It's not easy. We like to fail, and we like to learn from the failures, but we're all kind of invigorated by the new process too. It's given us something kind of new to chase after, and we're having the opportunity to innovate as we go along. And it's really generating some glue within the company to start to bring people together even more, to try to work on a goal that we all care about. And the consumer is changing, and our retail partners want us to be their stewards on the land because they're busy selling us all food. So we're highly motivated, and we're having fun too.
Wonderful. Vernon, tell us about your journey.
I think when you lose your sense of wonder, that's when you get old, right? So for us, we saw that where we had our highest soil organic matter, we had our best production, our lowest pest pressure, we had our best water retention. We grow stone fruit, peaches, plums, nectarines, that kind of stuff. So we also had our best orchard longevity, where we had the highest soil organic matter. So we've been organic for 20 years, of farming for 47 myself, but how do we get soil organic matter into our orchards so we can get the performance that we're getting in these orchards in all of them? So it wasn't, the word regenerative has only come up recently, but the way we're farming has been moving that way for 6 or 8 years.
That's a pretty tremendous example when you go back to the slide where we were talking about, is this just a practice you have to follow, or is this actually good for business, right? Oftentimes it can feel like there's a trade-off. Do we do this because it feels like the right thing, or we do this because it's good for business? And it sounds like the data you have has shown that those two are quite aligned.
Absolutely, and it's counterintuitive. You would think if you have green cover on all your orchards, you're using more water, right? But that it hasn't been our experience.
And that is what the data shows.
Well, I don't know if it's data, but we know how long we run the pump.
So So we have all of these different experiences and ways of getting into it. So fear not, there's no one right way in. Given your experiences, why do you feel that it's necessary, or is it necessary for the industry to adopt this, right? It's easy to say, well, we tried it out here, or this worked because of this specific reason in our business. When you think about it at a systems level, do you feel that it is necessary for this to be adopted on a broader scale?
I'll kick that one off. Well, I think it starts with your second slide you had about greenhouse gas emissions. And a third of greenhouse gas emissions are tied to our food systems today. So I think as an industry, we have an imperative to continue to explore more sustainable forms of agriculture. I think, and that's where regenerative comes in. I mean, we have an opportunity to use farming practices to lower our greenhouse gas emissions by, conservation tillage, cover cropping, using these practices that are proven to help our environment. It's a really exciting opportunity for us to use agriculture not to do less harm, but to actually help our environments. I think there's also an important context here today, just more broadly around sustainability in agriculture. Today, a lot of the sustainability in agriculture discussion is being led by CEA. And I might get myself in trouble for this one. But we had customer tours yesterday, and all of the questions yesterday were about CEA. And what the customers were saying was about, hey, we're being pitched by these companies. They're presenting CEA as this environmental silver bullet. And they're casting organic as a scam that's bad for the environment. And I think that dialogue is extremely dangerous for a couple reasons. One, I think it doesn't help grow our industry. It doesn't inspire confidence and encourage consumers to eat more healthy vegetables, which our consumer needs. And then two, it doesn't tell the full story. It's a cherry picking of data that fits a narrative while ignoring aspects of the data that don't quite fit that narrative. So if you look at Cornell studies and other university studies that compare greenhouse and vertical versus field grown, on water use and land use, greenhouse and vertical have tremendous benefits. And we should celebrate those benefits because we're in severe drought. And if we're able to farm with less water, that's powerful. But if you talk about energy consumption and you talk about greenhouse gas emissions, it actually flips. And field grown, particularly organic field grown, has significantly lower greenhouse gas emissions, significantly lower carbon footprint than both greenhouse and vertical, even accounting for food miles. And then you layer on regenerative, where now we're further enhancing our carbon sequestration, further lowering our greenhouse gas emissions, and we now have multiple tools in our toolkit to solve different environmental problems. So when we talk about sustainability in agriculture, I think it's important we take a holistic view. We focus truly on the problem we're trying to solve, and we take actions that solve that problem rather than just trading one problem for another problem.
I think it's a great point, and I'd like to connect that dialogue to one of the first stats we talked about of arable topsoil. There are many different ways to go about solving a challenge, but we have the soil right beneath our feet, and if we don't address that resource that we have and the ability to literally regenerate it, which we know is possible, then we're missing a gap. The thing I also like to say internally when we're talking about the opportunity, a lot of the tests and studies that we're doing on our farms, we are trying to find ways to not just prove it out, because you can read the studies that show that it quote unquote works, that the data is there. It more becomes about how you do it for your land and how do you actually hone in on the chemistry and the biology of your particular land. As we get further into this conversation, I know that the role of definitions and certifications becomes critical for a whole variety of reasons. First of all, as we referenced in the beginning, there's no one codified definition today. It's an ecosystem, systems-based concept, which can feel nebulous. And so the question becomes, how do I know if I'm doing it? How can I signal to the consumer, which is a whole other set of questions. And so naturally have popped up a variety of different certifications and verifications. So how do you all make sense? I know, Vernon, you are certified in regenerative organic certification from ROA. How do you all think about the role of these certifications and verifications? To some, it can feel messy and scary, and so how have you confronted that reality?
Yeah, so we had a really large CSA for quite a while. Thousands of boxes going out to folks all over California. And we had farm tours. We're getting hundreds of emails all the time. We've got 2 people just doing communication with that. Here's what I know, those, like Eric said, those intentional consumers, the kind of consumers you want in your store, they want to be intentional with what they do. And what they want is they want assurance that my food is coming from a place where they take really good care of their people. To me, that's EFI certification, okay? They want to know that the food that they're spending their dollar on is coming from a place that's taking really good care of the land. So we're certified at the ROC Gold level, you know? And that's a tool I can give to select retailers to not greenwashing, but tell a real story that this stuff is the real deal. And you buy this stuff, because I can't bring people from Toronto on a farm tour, right? But people in Toronto can see the ROC Gold label or the EFI label. So that's why I think that's important for key consumers and for key retailers. If that's cool.
Thank you. Absolutely.
Yeah, so on that, we've evaluated that. We haven't made the decision to do that yet. I just think on, as far as scale, with our 51 acres, and I imagine we'll allocate some more, but we're just not regularly producing, you know, crops that we're doing that. We're trying to figure out what the market is. We're really the first in the market, you know, the large scale cool season vegetable grower market with this product. We are supporting efforts with Matthew Grishep at Cal Poly as he starts to look into a federal standard closer to the NOP, and we're supporting his efforts there. So we're just trying to figure out what we're doing and how we're going to do it, and I imagine that certification will come along at some point, but what that looks like right now, we're not 100% sure. But there's going to be clearly a value in it when we get there.
Absolutely. One of the things we've thought quite a lot about is, and as we ask the question, is this the new organic, quote unquote, we've said, okay, well, there are farmers, including ourselves, who also produce conventional and organic today and are exploring regenerative. How do you think through all of these different practices in one place? One of the things that we have done at Bolthouse is we are actually testing some of the regenerative practices on the conventional plot. Now, the purists would say there's no such thing as regenerative that's not also organic, because it's, think of it as a systems based in addition to organic standards. But the question we asked ourselves is, well, how can we be proud of the work we're doing on a regenerative plot and not continue to think about how to advance what all agricultural practices look like? And so we've continued to study how we can take some of those practices and think about them more broadly on the farm. So I would ask you all the same question. How do you think about your regenerative plots, your practices, and obviously depending upon whether you are fully organic and regenerative or not, how do you reconcile that tension that will naturally come?
Well, our priority at Taylor Farms is pretty simple. We're trying to increase consumption of healthy, fresh vegetables. We believe that our products help people live healthier lives, healthier, longer, more vibrant lives. So we think having multiple tools in our toolkits is helpful to accomplish that goal. If you look at consumers across North America, consumers have different priorities. Some consumers want a more sustainable brand, some consumers want organic, some consumers may just want value or flavor. So we think having multiple tools in our toolkits, multiple brands, multiple product sets, multiple growing models will help us accomplish that ultimate goal of increasing consumption of healthy, fresh foods. And then good practices naturally migrate across the board. So we use a lot of organic farming practices in conventional today, and we expect that to happen with regenerative in the future.
Yeah, so I think for us, it's what we're kind of figuring out with the regulatory environment that we have, what the consumer needs, are changing consumer. These practices are going to benefit both the conventional side and the organic side. And one of the things that we're doing right now, and this is going to be, you know, for all growers, is we have a $100,000 Healthy Soils grant And really what we're doing is transitioning conventional farmland to organic farmland with regenerative principles. And we have a really good technical advisory committee, the University of California, kind of old school organic guys that know a lot of stuff, and really just trying to figure it out. But it's going to relate with the current inputs that we use to grow conventional crops and organic crops in the regulatory environment, the way things are going specifically in California first, things are going to be changing. If you want to continue farming, it's coming. You know, we're having a scoping meeting or information meeting on July 27th at the Farm Bureau as the county starts to look at agricultural greenhouse gas emissions. It won't be long until we're seeing that as a regulatory burden. On the conventional side, we're losing pesticides. Stackfall is gone, a primary herbicide in onions, broccoli, cauliflower. It's done. It doesn't break my heart. Pyrethroids and neonicotinoids are gone. They're showing up in the waterways. They're showing up in people's wells. The impact that these things also have on pollinators. We have 4 endangered bumblebees on the California endangered species list now. They're not going to allow us to use pesticides in a manner that will have an impact on them. So we need to look at all the systems we have, and I do think that regenerative practices in general are going to have applications to help us meet the regulatory environment that we're facing. In addition to that, if we can sequester carbon in the soil, because we're not right now. Our tillage is moving it, even in organic systems, back to CO2 the atmosphere. We're going to open up carbon markets as an additional resource for growers, and they need that additional resource and income. So we can reduce input costs, we can sequester carbon, we can take advantage of carbon markets and meet regulatory burdens, but we just have to open our eyes a little bit and start looking around and cooperating.
Yeah, it's not instead of, it's in addition to for us, you know, because everything's organic and we've, you know, everything's regenerative. So we try to be better this year than we were last year. And we mess up a lot this year, but we won't mess up that way next year.
That's right.
So
That's right.
That's where we're going.
Continuous improvement.
Mm-hmm,
But what I hear you describing, each of you, is a layer cake, right? I think sometimes it can feel like we have to be this or that, and that there's some firm boundary, and there has to be in some extent for the sake of certifications, definitions, those are important, but the boundaries being a little bit more fluid where you can say, how do we take this practice and extend it a little bit further so that it could become regenerative? How do we take a learning from regenerative and funnel it back into conventional? How do we think about this as holistic land and plant management rather than this plot is this and neither shall that mix with anything else? Which goes back to the systems-based nature of what regenerative is. It's not, hey, if you just pull these practices and add these, you're good to go. It's how do you regenerate the ecosystem and then turn it into a flywheel effect so that it can continue to expand upon itself. So I think that's a nice transition into the provocative title of the day of Is Regenerative the New Organic? I think based on what I'm hearing, the idea is that new suggests that perhaps it's replacing or superseding. What I'm hearing you say is, again, it's sort of in addition, but how would you think about that question that so many have on their mind?
I'll go. Is it the new organic? I think the practices and principles will be necessary in all markets if we're going to be sustainable. And really, our consumers want it. I'm going to be echoing my comments from previous, but our consumers are different than they were 30 years ago. They're looking for different products, the regulatory burdens, and there's a correlation that we're going to find for both conventional, but is it the new organic? Yeah, it's the new organic, and its elements are going to be the new conventional too. To survive, it will have to be.
And I'd agree with that. I think the organic movement had a ton of success sort of positioning organic as a solution for human health. I think regenerative has that same opportunity to build upon that success and position regenerative as a solution for environmental health. If you look at all farmland today, only 1.7% of US farmland is certified organic. I don't think that's too lofty of a goal for regenerative. I think because of everything we've been talking about, I think that's an attainable goal. But to get there, we need to work together. When you talk about organic movement, the key word is movement. That's people and companies and industry and communities working together behind a common goal. This is not something that any company is going to solve independently. We talk about these tillage challenges. These are hard challenges that other companies are going to face in our industry. So if we can work together as an industry and as a trade group, that's going to help solve a lot of these problems together and really expedite that sort of transition to regenerative as the new organic.
One of the things that I would jump in there to add is a recent study showed that produce being grown on regenerative plots have more nutrient density than non-regeneratively grown practices. So when you're talking about both the human and the planet, this is not conceptual about just, are we putting something onto the plant or not? It is actually when you have healthier soil, when you have the proper biology and chemistry of the soil to grow it, the food that comes out of it is more nutritious.
But and it's less nutritious to the pests for some reason. You know?
No, it's going to be a cycle. It's going to be healthy soil, healthy plant, healthy soil, and it's just going to we can increase. We're going to have better amino acid profiles. We're going to have a lot of different things that we're able to do. So we'll work on that. But yeah, I do really hope that we're able to demonstrate that. I think we can.
Yeah,
and in our market, I mean, the speed of what we do is vastly different than what you do, and so it gets a little crazy for us. But if we can slow it down, get that soil health going, there's a cycle there, and I think we need to find it.
And it isn't just our produce, it's wheat and all kind. Whatever you're reading in soil-based agriculture, it's moving regeneratively. And it's, the conventional people are trying to do it, but it's tough because those chemicals kill the biology.
Yes,
that's just fact. To get deeper into that question, if regenerative is the new organic, then organic has to be the new conventional, and I don't know you got enough time for that. But what I do know is, look, 5 years ago, where did you see a humanely raised chicken, right? And now, at least in California, you can't pick up a chicken that isn't humanely raised, right? It's a brand new certification, and we're contract chicken growers also, but we've got bales of hay out there and half barrels for them to hide under and all of these things. They never ask if we're taking good care of the chicken farmer. They just want to know how we're taking care of the chickens. But there's a certification that none of us knew about a decade ago for sure, and would have thought, what a dumb thing, right? But now it is ubiquitous, and regenerative is gaining traction with everybody in soil-based agriculture. Just the certification will follow that. Once you get to a certain level, if you're doing it, why not get credit for it?
Now, we've all been discussing going at it. It feels exciting and moving forward, and yet, Eric, you mentioned sort of a few steps forward, maybe experiencing a failure here or there, learning and growing. What have been the hardest parts? Because we've established the importance both for human and planetary health and for the future of our soil and therefore ability to farm. But make no mistake about it, when you're making a systems change, it is hard. And so what have been those hard moments for you?
Before we do hard, we'll do easy. Transplants are easy. Anything direct seeded is going to be harder. Without pulverizing the soil and planting it on this perfectly tabletop bed that we're used to. We think that our biggest challenge right now is figuring out how we're going to get kind of a permanent bed situation back to spring mix and spinach. These beds that are perfectly flat, able to be mechanically harvested. How do we get back to that? And so we've actually kind of gone away from a no-till scenario to just a greatly reduced till scenario. So if we can reduce tillage by 95%, and then try to find some dance, some sequence of crops where if we go from peas to lettuce to broccoli, get the legumes to fix some nitrogen. But at some point, we still got to be able to grow spring mix and spinach. We're going to have to reset the beds. When we do it, we're not going to work the ground as deep. Maybe we'll only work the top 8 inches of the soil. We're not going to be going down 3 feet and ripping it. So there's going to be some level of tillage. I don't know how we're going to do it another way, but the spring mix and spinach is the biggest conundrum. But we've gone with transplants a couple times. We've done direct seed. I know we can do direct seed better, but right now transplants and companion plantings. And I'll just say it, one of the best things that we figured out, because Rodney always gives us the bad ground to try stuff on. But it's a proving ground, right? So if you could do something there, you can probably do it anywhere. And on the bad ground, it has a lot of slope. It's decomposed granite they used as road base down the road. And our grower Kyle decided he was going to put some clover in the furrows. And it took a long time to get going. But what we're already seeing in this ground, even with regenerative practices, it has a tendency to pond water in the furrows and even run water off the field. Where the clover is, it's just going down.
Right.
And so more coverage has been better. It's hotter in Soledad where we're growing this crop than it used to be. Are we going to get more evaporative cooling from more plant cover? We battle with wind. If we have a little bit more, refuge from the wind from the beneficial insects, are we going to get more predation on the insects that we have issues with? So we're already seeing some real tangible benefits, and we just want to keep expanding. But the spring mix and spinach thing, there's going to be tillage with everything that we're thinking right now to get back to that. But after you grow that spring mix and spinach, I'm pretty sure you can just pop a transplant in it, fertilize it, water it, and let it go. There's not a reason not to do that, and we're going to be trying that shortly, because transplants are very forgiving compared to trying to get a broccoli seed to germinate.
Start.
Yeah, it gets really, especially on the bad ground. So,
And I think it's important to note that all of those challenges are in addition to what's happening today already. So we already ask a lot of our organic farmers today. I mean, there are a lot of competing demands about yield, quality, assured supply, food safety. We asked a lot of our organic farming group to go from conventional to organic. So we're going to be asking that same request, all these additional challenges, without sacrificing on any of the core, because we need to make sure that we're still putting healthy, fresh vegetables on the shelf while we transition to regenerative. So the challenge just gets harder and harder because we're not swapping one challenge for another here, we're just layering on additional asks. And that's going to be tough to scale along the long term, but we're confident with the right partners we'll get there.
And I would add to that if you can hear that concept of the challenge and it can feel overwhelming that we're adding that to it. If I may be so bold to say, part of the reason though that we're in this challenge is because some of the practices of the past have led to some of this soil degradation that has now required us to find a way to regenerate it. And so we're in this position where, to your point, it's hard on top of hard, but the alternative is even worse. And so you have to run towards the challenge to get there.
Yeah, with permanent orchards, gophers. We've created the perfect climate for a gopher. They've cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars, and that's not BS. They kill a tree, that's about $350 to get that tree back in an established orchard. Noxious weeds. When you're not working things up, how are you going to take care of those noxious weeds? And then you're managing, when you're keeping the orchard floor green year-round, you're managing another crop. So you're not just thinking about where is my peach in its life cycle and what's its water and nutrition needs. You're also thinking about that cover crop, and we're trying to do a very multi-species cover crop in there. What are they all doing? What do they need? While I'm also trying to grow a peach that gets to town happy. So
certainly no easy feat, but the way to move forward in order to keep us all growing. Where do you see this movement progressing in the next 5 years? It feels exciting and nascent, scary but necessary. Lots of questions about definitions and certifications. It can feel really cloudy right now to folks. So how do you see us finding a way through in the next 5 years? and longer, of course.
Well, there's the academic discussions, but at some point you got to untie the ship from the dock and head out in the ocean. And how are you going to guide those discussions if you're not involved at the certification level? So how do we get to where the pie in the sky wants to be in a real world way? So we've been able to collaborate with the wonderful folks at EFI, the wonderful folks at ROC, and say, this is a real farm. We're doing it. You need to tweak your definition because you want to be where we're at. Let me help you certify that. And I think it's valuable. I think we have to be involved on the cutting edge if we want to bring something that real people down the road can use, if that makes sense.
I think from our standpoint, with the tours that we did yesterday, there was just so much positive feedback on the efforts that we're doing, and people are starting to look for that product. I think our biggest challenge at this point is going to be scaling and actually doing it right. I think of the harvested plantings that we've had, and there's been 6, I think we got good yield on 1. So we can't put the cart before the horse too much. But yeah, there's definitely interest. The consumer's going to drive it. Our retail partners are looking for this product, or they're looking for a product in their marketplace that can distinguish them from other people. So a little bit of capitalism at play here in the entire thing. And 5 years for sure, yeah, but we've got a lot of work to do to be reliable. We don't have proof of concept yet, so we need to get there.
Yeah, and I really think it's going to be a slow build, but that's okay. You look at organic. I mean, we've been farming organic for 38 plus years, and as I mentioned, 1.7% of organic. So it's going to take time to generate the awareness with the consumer. It's going to take time to work through all these kinks that we've been talking about operationally, but that's okay. As long as we're all sort of working together towards a common goal, consistency in sort of how we're doing things, consistency in messaging will help solve some of these problems, and ultimately we think that this is going to be a really promising opportunity for processors, for retailers, and we think consumers will demand it at the end of the day.
And it's an interesting point to make. One of the discussions that is absolutely critical that, given the nature of this panel, we don't have time to do a whole separate one on, is where do we see this continuing to flow down, to your point, to the consumer demand, some of the stats you quoted around where future generations, what they're demanding of their produce moving forward. And so, of course, there's an entire set of questions to be asked around the nomenclature, the claims around it, how we show up on shelf, what those price points look like. I mean, it's a tremendous breadth and depth of questions still to be asked, but to your point, you have to lean forward and find a way into that. So we have just a few minutes left before the session wraps. I have to imagine there are many questions in the audience, so we will not be able to get to all of them, I am sure, but would love to throw a couple out there for our panelists to get a sense of what is on your mind. Yes.
Hi, my name is Haley. I'm from the Organic Farming Research Foundation. Hey everyone, I'm Haley from the Organic Farming Research Foundation, a nonprofit based in Santa Cruz here. And we work in the space and have for 32 years. And I was thinking, Bruce, as you were talking about the 1% of organic land across the country being organic, and that we're all here today because we want to see that movement grow. Yet so much of what you're talking about is based on-farm research trials. And there's so little funding out there to be able to do that, especially for smaller growers or the suppliers that you guys are working with. So I'm just curious how you guys see that happening. Like, obviously there's proprietary research that's happening, but really if we want a movement to grow, we need to get that information out there so it's readily available and accessible, and that more folks can adopt it. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks.
I can talk to, I think the Healthy Soils grant that we have is going to be a great tool. There's going to be 9 outreach sessions. I think that we're doing a panel at Eco Farm. And really all of the things that we're trying, we're an open book. We're not keeping it proprietary. We think that we actually have the opportunity to be on the tip of the spear here a little bit, to lead in this role, and we'll let competitors, our retail partners, anybody see what we're doing, come in. We've already got collaborations. We got different people that we're talking to already in the room that have different, viewpoints, different resources that can help. So we're already kind of channeling a lot of that energy, and we plan to continue. The amount of, we're supposed to be having a summary page of all the research that we're doing with the different entities and everything else like that, but I think it's so big we haven't finished it yet. So yeah, we want to be a conduit for all this information and keep pushing.
And organic has always been a lot more collaborative than conventional. The information shares a lot more freely. That's something that impressed me a lot when I first got into it. We're all just trying to figure it out.
Yeah, we've similarly tried to take a partnership model for some of the pressures that were just mentioned in that question, is to say if we're all going at it alone, we're not going to be moving at a systems-based speed that's really required, and how can we collectively think about this future together? Yes.
Good morning, I'm Allie Cox from AC&C Marketing. So one of the major drivers I'm understanding is consumer demand. And so I'm curious, obviously as a marketer, where are you getting the data? Are we doing consumer insights? What kind of research has been doing to understand that more information is needed from consumers so that we can grow and produce what they want?
I can take a swing at that one. So we've done a series of rounds of consumer research, and what we found at the consumer level is that awareness of regenerative is still relatively low. In our marketing department, we always talk about messaging. And when we say, sort of the analogy we use is if you throw 7 footballs at a person, they won't catch a single one. But if you throw 1 football at a person, they'll catch it every single time. So that's what we think is important in regenerative, is having sort of consistent messaging to the consumer of the value of regenerative, and we have to repeat that messaging over time. Awareness and understanding doesn't happen overnight, and that's okay. We'll just continue to sort of beat the same drum and maintain consistent messaging, and we think we can solve that problem in a few years.
I think we want to try to reach the consumer with the story of what we're trying to do and help create the market. I think it's an important market. I think it's going to need some effort to create it. And if we can communicate what our efforts are as an industry, as a company, then that will be helpful too. But yeah, I'm not pulling, my head is in the soil most of the day, so I'm not looking at marketing trends. We have people that do that and do a great job. But there's a gut feeling here that we need to be pursuing this, and people will come along with us.
Got time for one last question. Yes.
Kristen. Hi, I'm Dan Avakian with the Produce Industry Podcast. I have a couple of questions here, but I'll stick with one. How do you keep this, well, just rephrase it this way. When the feds get involved, how much red tape is there going to be? How do you keep politicians out of it, regulators, so that you can do what you need to do without bogging things down? And to her point earlier, there's a lot of small farmers, and I've dealt with a lot of them. When I had my store, I specialized in small organic farmers who had a hard time paying for the organic certification and dealing with it. So how do you keep this from getting out of hand with this big cloud of regulation?
Well, there's no government involved in the ROC certification, for instance. So it's a grassroots thing, Dan. I don't think we gain a lot from having the government involved, but we are, as organic farmers, we're the only business in the world that I know of that asks to be regulated, right? Is there another one? Can you think of another one? So,
yeah, I think we're already regulated, not just on the organic side, obviously, with the NOP. I do like that model. I like that there's different certifiers so that you can pick and choose, whatever works best for you, whatever they specialize, and I think that's a great model. I hope something like, that becomes available in this regenerative market. But as far as red tape, the red tape's coming, the red tape's here. And so it's just a matter of being aware of it and what is your strategy to adapt to it. So it's inevitable. In 2009, I told Rob Braga they're going to limit how much fertilizer you use. He said it was crazy. And you know, the latest ag order in the central coast, there's limits. We're already meeting timelines set out for 2035 with our fertilizer use, so it's not too much of a concern. But there's still people that are really loading surface and groundwater with nitrates, you know, causing problems for communities. So.
Well, I would like to thank all of you for attending and to our panelists for this dynamic discussion.
I like you.
See, he just wanted everybody to know that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
All right.
How about I pull this plug out of the back?